Clay Hawthorne staggered through the desert, his last piece of bread clutched tight, the only thing standing between him and starvation. Dust, his limping mare, snorted faintly beside him, both of them pushed past their limits under a merciless sun. Then he saw her, a native girl, crumpled against a boulder, her eyes already half closed with death's shadow. He could have kept walking. Should have. In this lawless wasteland, kindness was a death sentence. But Clay stopped, his hand trembling over that bread. What no one knew, not the girl, not the unseen eyes watching from the cliffs, was that his next choice would spark a gathering of 7 tribes, bring 500 warriors to their knees, and force a reckoning that could either forge peace or burn the desert red with war. Clay Hawthorne trudged through the desert, his boots kicking up red dust that clung to everything. The sun burned high overhead, relentless, turning the world into a haze of heat and grit. His gray mare Dust limped beside him, her left front leg favoring each step. Clay's stomach had stopped growling 2 days ago, replaced by a hollow ache that made every movement deliberate. His tongue scraped against cracked lips. In his saddlebag, wrapped in a frayed cloth, was his last possession of value, a single piece of bread, hard as leather, but still food, still life. Ahead, the trail stretched endlessly through scattered rocks and shimmering mountains. No town for another day's ride, maybe 2. No water since yesterday. Clay adjusted his worn hat, pulling it lower against the glare. He'd been a drifter since the war, carrying scars no one could see. The war taught him to keep moving, but not how to forget. He calculated survival in his head. The bread might get him to the next settlement if Dust held up, if he didn't collapse first. Then movement caught his eye. 20 yards off the trail, huddled against a boulder, sat a small figure. Dark hair, torn clothing that might have been buckskin once. A child no more than 8 or 9. Clay's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip, then stopped. The figure wasn't moving, wasn't even looking up, just sitting there, arms wrapped around drawn knees, rocking slightly. He'd seen enough death in his 35 years to recognize it creeping close. The smart thing was to keep walking. This was contested territory, Sunkani land or so, the settlers whispered. Showing mercy here was a luxury for men with full bellies and safe destinations. But something in the child's stillness rooted Clay's feet to the ground. He squinted, studying the figure again. Native by the look of the clothes. Probably lost, maybe abandoned, definitely starving. His fingers brushed the cloth-wrapped bread in his saddlebag. His last bread. His survival. The child looked up and Clay saw eyes that held no fear, only the quiet acceptance of someone who'd made peace with dying. His chest tightened. He'd worn that look once in the war when hope was just a word. In that moment, Clay made a choice, one that would echo across the mountains in ways he couldn't imagine. He approached slowly, boots crunching on the gravelly earth. Up close, it was worse than he'd thought. The child, a girl he could see now, had lips white and cracked hands trembling despite the heat. This wasn't just hunger. This was the edge of death. "Easy there," Clay said, crouching to her level. "I ain't gonna hurt you." Her dark eyes met his unblinking. No words, just that stare, like she was waiting for him to prove himself a liar. Clay pulled the bread from his saddlebag, unwrapped it carefully. The crust could break teeth, but it was food. Real food. Her eyes followed his hands, but she didn't reach for it. Pride, maybe, or fear, or maybe she was too weak to try. He broke off a piece and held it out. "Go on. Take it." Her fingers shook as she took it, biting into it with the desperate care of someone who hadn't eaten in days. The sound of her chewing filled the silence, the only noise in the vast emptiness around them. Clay watched her, his own hunger clawing at him. Each piece he gave away was a day off his own life, but seeing her eat, seeing those eyes flicker with something like hope, made it worth the trade. "What's your name?" he asked. She finished chewing, swallowed hard. Her voice was a whisper. "Ayanna. That's a pretty name. I'm Clay." She nodded, taking another small bite, making the bread last. Smart girl, Clay thought. She understood survival. But a new worry crept into his mind. Feeding her was only the first problem. Out here alone, she wouldn't last another day, even with food in her belly, and he was barely equipped to save himself, let alone a child. The smart thing was to give her the rest of the bread and keep moving. Let her fate unfold without getting tangled up in it. But looking at Ayanna, seeing her clutch that bread like it was gold, Clay knew he'd already made his choice. He broke off the last piece and handed it to her. She wrapped it carefully in the cloth, saving it for later. The gesture hit him harder than expected. Hope. Planning for tomorrow. "Where's your family, Ayanna?" he asked. Her eyes grew distant. Gone. One word carrying a world of pain. Out here gone could mean dead lost or worse. Clay stood his knees protesting. Dust watched them, both ears pricked with curiosity. Well, he said more to himself than her. "Can't leave you here." He lifted Ayanna onto Dust's back. The mare snorted softly, but accepted the weight. The girl weighed almost nothing, another reminder of how close to death she'd been. "We'll find you somewhere safe," Clay said, though he had no idea where that might be. The nearest town was a day's hard ride, assuming Dust's leg held up. As they started walking, Ayanna spoke again, her voice barely audible. "You should not have stopped." Clay glanced up at her. "Why's that?" "My people. They watch. Always watch." Her small hands gripped the saddle horn. "White men who help, it confuses them." Something cold settled in Clay's stomach. "Your people watching us now." Ayanna's eyes scanned the cliffs. They see everything in these mountains. Clay kept his voice casual. "And what do they do when they see white men?" "Depends." She shifted in the saddle. "Most white men take." "You gave." The words hit like a physical blow. He'd walked into territory where his kind were killed on sight, and now he was traveling with living proof he'd been here. Turning back wasn't an option. Ayanna wouldn't survive another night alone. They walked in silence, the sun beating down mercilessly. Clay's throat felt like sandpaper, but he pushed forward. Every step took them closer to what safety seemed like a fantasy now. "Clay," Ayanna said, her voice faint. "Yeah, they're following us." His blood turned to ice. He didn't turn, didn't change his pace, but every nerve went on high alert. "How many, I cannot tell." She paused. "My grandfather taught me to count horses by their hooves." "Many horses." Clay's mind raced. If they were being tracked by a war party, running was pointless. Dust was lame, and carrying double would slow them to a crawl. Fighting was worse. His revolver held 6 shots, assuming he lived long enough to use them. "Ayanna," he said carefully, "what did your grandfather say about white men? Most have hearts of stone." She was quiet for a moment. "But some have hearts that remember what it means to be human." And how do they tell the difference? Before she could answer, the sound reached them. Distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Many of them moving fast, getting closer. Clay stopped. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The desert offered no cover, no escape. He helped Ayanna down from Dust and checked his revolver. 6 bullets against what sounded like an army. "What happens now?" he asked. Ayanna looked toward the approaching sound, her expression unreadable. "Now we find out if giving your last bread was the smartest thing you ever did. Or the last." The hoofbeats grew louder. Dust's ears twitched nervously. Clay stood in the middle of nowhere protecting a child with nothing but an empty stomach and a decision he couldn't take back. Dust clouds rose against the sky like smoke signals announcing his fate. The riders appeared over the ridge, 20 warriors on painted horses, moving with the precision of men born to the saddle. Clay's hand hovered near his gun but didn't draw. Not yet. The lead rider was older, his face weathered by sun and wind silver streaking his black hair. His eyes held the weight of too many battles. He raised a hand and the party stopped 50 yards away. Silence stretched tight as a bowstring. Ayanna stepped forward, her small voice clear and strong in her native tongue. Clay couldn't understand the words, but he caught the rhythm of storytelling. She gestured to him to the empty cloth that had held the bread to herself. The old warrior listened, his face unreadable. When she finished, he studied Clay with eyes that saw through to his soul. "You are the one who gave away his last food," the warrior said, his English heavy with an accent. Clay nodded. "Yes." "Why?" It was a simple question that demanded truth. Clay thought about lying, claiming noble motives, but those eyes demanded honesty. Because she was dying, and I couldn't live with watching it happen. The warrior was silent for a long time. Behind him, the riders sat motionless, weapons ready but not aimed, waiting for their leader's word. "I am Tsekani," he said finally. "Ayanna is my granddaughter." Clay's world shifted. The child wasn't just any lost soul, she was family to a war chief. The implications crashed over him like a flood. "She was taken 3 days ago by a rival clan," Tsekani continued. "We tracked them here. Found only blood and torn clothing. We thought..." His voice caught. "We thought she was dead." Ayanna moved to stand beside her grandfather's horse. Clay saw the resemblance in their dark eyes. "But she lives," Tsekani said, his gaze returning to Clay, "because you chose her life over your own." Clay shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what seemed right." "Right," Tsekani repeated, tasting the word. "Many white men speak of right. Few act on it when it costs them something." Clay didn't know how to respond. He stood there waiting, the weight of 20 warriors' eyes on him. "You have given me back my heart," Tsekani said slowly. "My granddaughter is the last of my bloodline. When we lost her, a grandfather's grief makes poor decisions." Clay waited, hardly breathing. "But now she returns, fed by your sacrifice." Tsekani's expression was unreadable. "This creates a debt." "No debt necessary," Clay said quickly. "I'm just glad she's safe." Tsekani smiled, an expression that transformed his face. "White man who refuses payment for saving a chief's granddaughter. You are either very wise or very foolish." "Probably foolish," Clay admitted. "Good. Wisdom can be taught. Character cannot." Tsekani raised his hand again, and Clay tensed, expecting the worst. But instead of weapons, the warriors began to dismount. "You will come with us. Tonight you are our guest. Tomorrow..." Something mysterious flickered in his eyes. "Tomorrow you will understand what your kindness has purchased." Clay had no choice but to trust. He followed the warriors, Ayanna riding beside Tsekani, as they moved toward a hidden valley between towering red cliffs. The camp was invisible from the desert floor, a bustling community of at least 200 warriors, women, children, elders, all moving with quiet efficiency. They stared as Clay rode in, not with hostility but curiosity. Word of his deed had spread. Tsekani led him to a central fire pit surrounded by smooth stones. "Sit," he said. "Eat. Rest." Within minutes, Clay was overwhelmed by hospitality. A woman with silver hair braided with beads, Mira, an elder, brought a bowl of stew that smelled like heaven after days of hunger. Children offered water from decorated gourds. Men nodded respectfully as they passed. This is more kindness than I deserve, Clay said, settling beside Chakani on a woven blanket. You showed mercy to a child? Not your blood, Chakani replied. In a place where mercy could cost your life. This deserves recognition. As Clay ate, Ayana sat nearby, already looking healthier. She spoke rapidly to other children in their language, gesturing excitedly. Clay caught his name mentioned several times. What's she telling them, he asked. The story of the cowboy who gave away his tomorrow for a stranger's today, Chakani said, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Already it grows in the telling. By winter you'll have fought off wolves bare-handed. Clay smiled despite himself. Stories have a way of getting bigger. Stories are how we remember what matters, Chakani said, growing serious. My people have many stories about white men. Most are dark. Tonight we add a different kind. Mira approached, speaking to Chakani in rapid, urgent tones. Clay caught the respect in her voice, but also concern. Chakani listened, then nodded. Mira melted back into the crowd. Everything all right? Clay asked. Moondancer brings news, Chakani said. Other tribes have heard of Ayana's rescue, of the white man who sacrificed for a native child. Word travels fast in the mountains. Is that a problem? Perhaps. Perhaps opportunity. Chakani stood. Come. There is something you must see. He led Clay to the edge of the camp where the ground dropped into another valley. Below, flickering lights dotted the landscape, dozens of camps. All those people, Clay asked. 7 tribes, Chakani confirmed. Traditional enemies, many of them. But tonight, they gather for the same reason. Clay's stomach dropped. To discuss what to do with me, to discuss what your actions mean. Chakani placed a hand on Clay's shoulder. For generations our peoples have warred. We have reasons for distrust. But you have created a crack in the wall between our worlds. The weight of his words settled on Clay like a burden. I just helped a hungry child. Yes. And sometimes the smallest pebble starts the greatest avalanche. Below, drums began to beat, echoing off the canyon walls, a rhythm that pulsed like the earth's heartbeat. What happens tomorrow? Clay asked. Chakani's smile was enigmatic. Tomorrow, you will stand before 500 warriors from 7 tribes. They will decide if your deed was one man's conscience or a sign that peace is possible. Clay barely slept. The drums wove through his dreams a heartbeat of sound. When dawn broke painting, the red rock's gold Chakani was already awake, sitting by the dying fire. Nervous, the chief asked. Terrified, Clay admitted. Chakani chuckled. Good. Fear keeps a man honest. He stood brushing dust from his buckskins. Time to prepare. Women approached with clean buckskins decorated with intricate beadwork. Clay looked at Chakani questioningly. You cannot stand before the council looking like a desert rat, Chakani said. Honor demands proper presentation. As Clay changed, he watched the valley transform. The scattered camps converged toward a flat area between the cliffs. Hundreds of people flowed like water to a common destination. Gatherings like this happened before, Clay asked. Once when I was young, Chakani said, his expression darkening. To discuss war with the cavalry. Many died afterward. Today, we discuss something different. They descended into the valley as the sun climbed higher. The crowd was larger than Clay imagined. Warriors from 7 tribes, each group distinct in dress and markings, united in their focus on him. A circle had formed with chiefs seated on blankets in the center. Clay recognized the hierarchy. These were men whose words carried life and death. Chakani guided him to the circle's center. The crowd fell silent. Brothers, Chakani began, his voice carrying. 3 days ago, we lost more than my granddaughter. We lost hope that kindness could exist between our peoples. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, others skeptical. But this man Tsakani gestured to Clay proved courage comes in many forms. He could have passed by. He could have taken what little she carried. Instead, he gave his own survival for a child he did not know. An older chief with scars across his chest stood. Pretty words, Tsakani, but one man's kindness does not erase generations of broken promises. Agreement rumbled from the crowd. True, Tsakani said. But if we judge all white men by the worst, do we become like those who judge all natives by raiders? The scarred chief considered this. What do you propose? A test, Tsakani said. If this man's heart is different, let him prove it. Clay's pulse quickened. What kind of test? You will walk among us for one day, Tsakani said. No weapons, no protection except our word. You will see how we live, share our food, hear our stories. And at sunset, you will choose. Choose what? Whether to return to your people with knowledge of our camps, our numbers, our weaknesses, or to carry a different message, one of possibility. The scarred chief leaned forward. And if he chooses wrongly, then nothing changes. Tsakani said. The walls between us remain. Clay looked at the faces around him, some hopeful, some hostile. He thought of Ayanna, now safe with other children, of his empty saddlebags, his uncertain future. I accept, he said. A new murmur swept the crowd, surprise, approval, concern. But as the chiefs nodded, Clay caught movement on the canyon rim. Riders, white men armed, watching. His blood ran cold. Word of this gathering had spread beyond the tribes, and some would kill to stop it. Clay spent the morning moving through the camp like a ghost between worlds. Children who should have feared him brought wooden toys. Elders like Mira shared stories of hunts and battles, their hands painting pictures in the air. Women offered food prepared with care. But the riders on the ridge haunted his thoughts. Tsakani, he said quietly when they were alone. We have a problem. The chief followed Clay's gaze to the rim. His expression hardened. How many? At least a dozen. Armed. Watching. Soldiers, maybe. Could be civilians. Tsakani was silent. This is what we feared. Peace talks make some nervous. What do we do? Nothing for now. But we prepare. Tsakani gestured subtly, and warriors drifted to the camp's edges, ready but discreet. The day continued despite the threat. Clay saw mothers teaching daughters to weave, boys learning archery with their father's patience. He shared meals with families who treated him like a guest. As afternoon approached, the scarred chief, Red Owl, sought him out. You see how we live, he said. Not as savages, as people, I see that, Clay said. Yet your people come to our valley armed, watching, waiting. Red Owl's scarred face was grim. This does not surprise us. It disappoints. Not all white men think the same, Clay said. Then prove it. Red Owl pointed to the rim. Those men will not let this gathering end peacefully. They cannot afford to let word spread that natives and whites can coexist. Clay felt impossible choices pressing down. What are you asking me to do when the time comes, and it will come soon? Choose a side. Not between red and white, but between fear and hope. As if summoned shouts erupted from the rim. The riders were moving, no longer content to watch. Tsakani appeared at Clay's side. It begins, he said. How many are coming down? Too many, Tsakani said, his jaw set. But we are not defenseless. Warriors emerged from concealment throughout the camp, more than Clay realized. But they were protecting families, children, elders. Fighting would mean casualties among innocents. There has to be another way, Clay said. What do you suggest? Clay looked at the approaching riders, then at Ayanna sitting with other children, her eyes wide but trusting. Let me talk to them. Red Owl laughed bitterly. Talk. They come with guns, not words. Maybe. but I'm still white in their eyes. That might buy us something. Chikani studied him. And if they do not listen, then we find out if your warriors are as good as their reputation. The hoofbeats grew closer. Clay started walking toward the sound, leaving safety behind for the second time in 2 days. This time, he wasn't just risking his life, he was risking everyone in the valley. The riders thundered into the valley, 15 men, heavily armed faces set for violence. Their leader, a thick-set man with dead eyes, reined his horse hard when he saw Clay. Well, well, the man called, if it ain't the famous Indian lover himself. Clay stopped 20 feet away, hands visible. Captain Ward, you do remember me. Ward's smile was cold. Last time we met, you were leaving the army under unfortunate circumstances. Different war, different choices, Clay said evenly. Same yellow streak. Ward gestured to the camp. Consorting with the enemy now? I don't see enemies here. Just families. Ward laughed harshly. Families that have been raiding settlements for months. Families that need a lesson. These people haven't raided anyone. This is a peaceful gathering. Peaceful Ward pointed to the warriors around the camp. Looks like they're ready for war to me, only because you brought one to their doorstep. The standoff stretched taut. Behind Ward, his men fingered their weapons. Behind Clay, the camp held its breath. Here's what's going to happen, Ward said. You walk away from this mess. Forget you were ever here. And maybe we'll let you ride out alive. And the people in the camp. Not your concern anymore. Clay felt the moment crystallize. Ayana's trust. Chikani's wisdom. Red Owl's challenge to choose between fear and hope. I can't do that. Ward's face darkened. Then you're a fool. Probably. But I've been called worse. Ward raised his hand and Clay tensed for the order that would turn the valley into a battlefield. But another sound filled the air. Hoofbeats, many of them. Clay turned to see warriors emerging from the cliffs, the side canyons, the rocky outcroppings. Dozens, then hundreds. 500 warriors moving in silence surrounding Ward's force, like shadows given form. Ward's men shifted nervously, suddenly aware they were outnumbered. Impressive, Ward said, but his voice had lost its edge. We have better weapons. Do you? Chikani's voice carried across the valley as he rode forward. Look again. Ward looked and his face went pale. Every warrior carried a rifle new and well-maintained. Trade, Chikani said simply. We are not as isolated as you believe. The math was deadly 15 against 500 in terrain the natives knew intimately. Ward's bravado crumbled. What do you want? He asked through gritted teeth. What we have always wanted, Chikani replied. To be left in peace. Red Owl rode up beside Chikani. This man, he gestured to Clay, has shown us peace is possible. Today you will show us if your people are capable of the same wisdom. Ward glared at Clay with hatred. This ain't over. Yes, it is, Clay said quietly. It ends here today. You ride away, spread the word these people want peace. Or you stay and explain to your superiors how you started a war you couldn't win. For a moment, Ward weighed his options. Then slowly he raised his hand in retreat. Move out, he called to his men. As the riders disappeared up the canyon trail, the warriors faded back into the landscape, silent as they'd appeared. Within minutes, the valley was peaceful again. You chose well, Chikani said to Clay. So did you, Clay replied. This is just the beginning, Red Owl added. There will be others like Ward. Maybe, Chikani said, smiling. But there will also be others like Clay. And perhaps in time more bridge builders than wall builders. As sunset painted the canyon walls gold and red, Clay realized his test was complete. He'd walked between worlds and found his place not as white or native, but as something new. A bridge between peoples who'd forgotten they shared the same sky. Ayana ran up, her face bright with joy. "You stayed, I stayed," Clay confirmed. And in that simple exchange, the future began to change. Clay never returned to his old life. He became a translator, a mediator, helping tribes and settlers find common ground instead of battlefields. Ayana grew up bilingual in language and culture, becoming a teacher who helped children navigate between worlds. Chekani lived to see the peace he dreamed of take root, watching his granddaughter marry and raise children who knew no difference between red and white, only between right and wrong. In the desert, where a hungry cowboy shared his last bread, a trading post grew into a town where all were welcome. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo across generations, reminding us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Here, take my last piece of bread."